The morning sun blazed like wildfire over the Montana territory, illuminating the trail of dust rising beneath Lillian Dawson's horse as she raced across the open plain. The year was 1876, and at 22, Lillian had already decided the confines of proper society back east were not for her. Her chestnut mare, Penny, thundered across the grassland, mane whipping in the wind until the snake appeared. One moment Lillian was flying, the next she was sailing through the air as Penny reared in terror, throwing her rider into the unforgiving dust. The impact knocked the breath from Lillian's lungs. She lay stunned, tasting dirt and the metallic hint of blood where she'd bitten her lip. Her vision swam with spots of light against the endless blue sky, then a shadow fell across her face. A man, silhouetted against the sun, knelt beside her. "Miss, can you hear me?" His voice was deep, tinged with concern. Rough hands gently brushed hair from her face. That was quite a tumble. Lillian tried to speak but could only cough. "Easy now," he said, helping her to sit. As her vision cleared, she saw him properly sun-bronzed skin, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a weathered Stetson pushed back on his head. A cowboy with capable hands and a worried frown. "My horse," she managed to rasp. "Spooked by a rattler. She's over yonder, calming down." He gestured to where Penny stood pawing the ground nervously about 50 yards away. "You might have broken something. Better not move too quick." As Lillian attempted to stand, pain shot through her ankle and she stumbled. The cowboy caught her arm, steadying her. "I'm Ethan Calloway," he said, still holding her elbow. "Ranch foreman at the Triple Creek." "Lillian Dawson," she replied, brushing dust from her riding skirt. "I was on my way to Willow Creek. My uncle's expecting me." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "That's Miles Dawson, the newspaper man." Lillian nodded, surprised. "You know him?" "Everyone knows Miles Dawson in these parts." Something in his tone suggested this wasn't entirely a good thing. Lillian tried to take another step and winced. Ethan watched her, his expression shifting to determination. "You're not riding anywhere on that ankle," he said. "Triple Creek's just over that rise. We'll get you patched up, then I'll escort you to your uncle's place tomorrow." Before she could protest, he whistled sharply, bringing Penny trotting reluctantly back. As he helped Lillian into the saddle, their eyes met. "I apologize for the poor introduction to Montana," he said with the hint of a smile. "I'll catch you next time you decide to go flying." The promise in his words warmed her despite the throbbing pain. Something in his steady gaze made her heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with her fall. "I'll hold you to that, Mr. Calloway," she replied. Little did Lillian know that this dusty encounter was just the beginning. The Montana Territory held far more challenges and possibilities than she had ever imagined. Triple Creek Ranch spread across the valley like a kingdom unto itself. As they approached, Lillian could see cattle dotting the hillsides and a sprawling main house nestled among cottonwoods. Several outbuildings and a large barn completed the picture of frontier prosperity. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely impressed. "Built it up from nearly nothing," Ethan replied, pride evident in his voice. "Mr. Hargrove, he's the owner, started with just 50 head of cattle, and this patch of land 15 years ago." Lillian studied Ethan's profile as he led her horse toward the main house. His face bore the marks of a life lived outdoors, lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun, a small scar along his jawline. He couldn't be much older than 30, yet there was a gravity to him that spoke of responsibility beyond his years. "How long have you been foreman here?" she asked. "Going on 5 years now. Came west after the war, needed open spaces after." He didn't finish, but Lillian understood. Many men had sought new beginnings in the West after the devastation of the Civil War. A woman emerged from the main house as they approached, wiping her hands on an apron. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her face softened when she saw Ethan. "What trouble have you brought home now, Ethan Calloway?" She called, though her tone was more amused than accusatory. "Mrs. Potter, this lady took a fall from her horse," Ethan explained as he helped Lillian dismount. "Miss Lillian Dawson, meet Martha Potter, the finest cook in the territory and the one who keeps us all in line." "Dawson." Mrs. Potter's eyebrows rose. "Any relation to Miles Dawson?" "He's my uncle," Lillian confirmed, wondering again at the reactions the name provoked. "Well, blood ain't a person's fault," Mrs. Potter said cryptically. "Come inside, dear. Let's have a look at that ankle." Inside, the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. Simple furnishings were arranged with care, and the large windows allowed light to flood the rooms. Mrs. Potter led Lillian to a cushioned chair in the kitchen, gesturing for her to extend her injured leg. "Ethan, fetch some cold water from the pump," she ordered, already unlacing Lillian's boot with gentle efficiency. As Ethan left, Lillian couldn't help asking, "Why does everyone react that way about my uncle?" Mrs. Potter's hands paused momentarily. "Miles Dawson's newspaper has stirred up its share of trouble. He's got strong opinions about how things should be run in these parts." "That sounds like Uncle Miles," Lillian admitted. "He's always believed in the power of the written word to effect change." "Some changes aren't welcomed by everyone," Mrs. Potter said carefully, "especially when they threaten certain interests." Before Lillian could inquire further, Ethan returned with a bucket of cold water. Mrs. Potter directed him to pour some into a basin, then immersed Lillian's swollen ankle. "Just a bad sprain," she pronounced after examining it. "Keep it cold, then wrap tight. No riding for at least 2 days." "But I need to reach my uncle by tomorrow," Lillian protested. "He's expecting me." "I'll ride into town and let him know what happened," Ethan offered. "He can come fetch you if he's of a mind to. Or you could stay here until you're healed enough to travel," Mrs. Potter suggested. "We've plenty of room, and it would give you a chance to rest before facing town life." Lillian hesitated. She'd only just met these people, yet there was something reassuring about Ethan's steady presence and Mrs. Potter's no-nonsense care. Besides, 2 days to recover before dealing with her uncle who could be overwhelming at the best of times seemed prudent. "Thank you," she decided. "I accept your hospitality if it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all," Mrs. Potter assured her. "Though Mr. Hargrove is away on business, I'm certain he'd approve." Later, after a simple but hearty dinner, Lillian sat on the front porch, her bandaged ankle propped on a stool. The evening was painting the sky in spectacular shades of pink and gold. Ethan emerged from the barn and approached, carrying something in his hands. "Thought you might want these," he said, presenting her with a small bundle of wildflowers, "since you can't go exploring yourself just yet." The gesture was so unexpected and thoughtful that Lillian felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you," she said, accepting them. "They're beautiful." Ethan settled on the porch steps, his hat beside him. Without it, his dark hair showed a tendency to curl at the temples. "So what brings you to Montana territory, Miss Dawson? Most Eastern ladies aren't exactly clamoring to visit our rough country." Lillian ran her fingers over the delicate petals of a blue flower. "After my parents died last year, there wasn't much keeping me in Boston. Uncle Miles wrote that he needed help with his newspaper. He's getting older, and his eyesight isn't what it was." "You're a journalist, too?" "I've written for small publications," she admitted. "Women's interests mainly, but I've always wanted to cover more substantial topics." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Your uncle certainly covers substantial topics. His editorials about the cattle barons and their methods have made him some powerful enemies." Lillian's interest sharpened. "What methods exactly?" Ethan studied her for a moment, as if deciding how much to say. This territory's changing, Miss Dawson. The days of open range are ending. Now it's all about who controls the water rights, the best grazing land. Some of the big outfits, not Triple Creek. Mind you, they don't take kindly to smaller ranchers or homesteaders getting in their way. And my uncle writes about this, with a passion that borders on recklessness, Ethan confirmed. Last month, he printed a piece about how certain ranchers were diverting streams to deny water to smaller operations downstream. Named names, too. That sounds like Uncle Miles. He's never believed in mincing words. Words can get a man killed out here, Ethan said soberly. A chill ran through Lillian despite the warm evening. Has he received threats? I wouldn't know the particulars, Ethan replied, but it might explain why he sent for family. Your uncle's not the type to admit he needs protection, but having someone else at the newspaper office would mean he's not alone. The conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Potter calling Ethan to help with something in the barn. As he rose to leave, Lillian caught his arm. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I appreciate knowing what I might be walking into." His expression softened. "Just be careful, Miss Dawson. Montana can be as dangerous as it is beautiful." As she watched him walk away, Lillian felt a strange mixture of apprehension and excitement. She'd come west seeking purpose after the emptiness following her parents' deaths. It seemed she might find more challenge than she'd bargained for, and perhaps more connection, too, as she found herself watching Ethan's retreating figure longer than propriety allowed. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed, Lillian couldn't sleep. Her thoughts cycled between concern for her uncle, curiosity about the local conflicts Ethan had mentioned, and memories of the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Eventually, she lit a lamp and retrieved her journal from her traveling bag. If sleep wouldn't come, she could at least organize her thoughts. As she wrote, the vast Montana night surrounded the ranch house, stars blazing in patterns both familiar and strange, much like everything else in this new chapter of her life. The next morning brought a flurry of activity to Triple Creek. Ethan prepared to ride into Willow Creek to notify Miles Dawson of his niece's whereabouts, while ranch hands moved cattle from one pasture to another in a carefully orchestrated dance of hooves and dust. Lillian, despite Mrs. Potter's protests, insisted on helping with breakfast preparations. Her ankles still throbbed, but she'd never been one to sit idle. Besides, working alongside the older woman gave her an opportunity to learn more about the local situation and about Ethan Calloway. "How did Ethan come to be foreman here?" Lillian asked as she sliced bread for toast. Mrs. Potter glanced up from the bacon sizzling in her cast-iron skillet. "Showed up 7 years ago, barely more than a boy despite having fought in the war. Mr. Hargrove saw something in him right away, a natural way with horses, a head for the business side of ranching. Worked his way up from regular hand to foreman faster than anyone expected. He seems very dedicated. This place saved him, I think," Mrs. Potter said, her voice softening. "He never talks about it, but I gather he lost everyone in the war. Family home burned, parents gone. Triple Creek became his home and the hands his family." The information made Lillian's heart ache. No wonder Ethan seemed older than his years. He'd already faced more loss than many faced in a lifetime. Before they could continue, Ethan himself appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "Something's come up," he announced, his expression grave. "2 of our hands just rode in from the North Range. They found signs of cattle rustling overnight." Mrs. Potter's face tightened with concern. "Not again." "I'll need to check it out before heading to town," he continued, then looked at Lillian. "I'm sorry, Miss Dawson. I'll still get word to your uncle, but it might be later today." "I understand," Lillian assured him. Your responsibilities here come first. A flash of gratitude crossed his face. Thank you. I'll be back as soon as I can. After a hasty breakfast, Ethan gathered several men and rode out. Left to her own devices, Lillian convinced Mrs. Potter to help her to a comfortable chair on the porch with her writing materials. If she couldn't actively explore her new surroundings, she could at least document her observations and impressions. The morning passed pleasantly enough, with Lillian alternating between writing in her journal and sketching the panoramic view of mountains and grassland. Around midday, however, the peaceful atmosphere was shattered by the sound of approaching horses, not the expected return of Ethan and his men, but a group of riders Lillian didn't recognize. Mrs. Potter emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression wary as she watched the approaching horsemen. "Who is it?" Lillian asked, sensing the older woman's unease. "Maxwell Warner and his men," Mrs. Potter replied tersely. "Owner of the Rocking W, biggest spread in the territory, and not someone I care to entertain while Mr. Hargrove and Ethan are away." The riders approached the house at a leisurely pace, their leader a substantial man in his 50s with a silver-streaked beard and expensive clothing that set him apart from his rougher companions. As they reached the porch, Warner removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Mrs. Potter, lovely as always," he called out. "I was hoping to have a word with Hargrove or that foreman of his." "Both away on ranch business, Mr. Warner," Mrs. Potter replied coolly. "I'd offer coffee, but I know you're a busy man and wouldn't want to be delayed." Warner chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. His gaze shifted to Lillian, assessing. "And who might this young lady be?" Before Mrs. Potter could answer, Lillian spoke up. "Lillian Dawson, sir. I'm visiting Triple Creek briefly while recovering from a riding accident." Warner's expression changed subtly at her surname. "Dawson, any relation to that troublemaking newspaperman in Willow Creek?" "My uncle," Lillian acknowledged, lifting her chin slightly. "Interesting." Warner studied her with new intensity. "Very interesting. Perhaps you might carry a message to your uncle when you see him. Tell him that not everyone appreciates his particular brand of journalism. Some might even consider it dangerous to their health." The threat was thinly veiled, and Lillian felt a chill despite the warm day. Mrs. Potter stepped forward. "Mr. Warner, I'm sure whatever business you have with Mr. Dawson can be conducted directly with him in town," she said firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Miss Dawson needs her rest." Warner held Lillian's gaze a moment longer, then replaced his hat. "Of course. Do give my regards to Hargrove when he returns. Tell him I'm still waiting for his answer about my proposition." With that cryptic remark, he signaled to his men and they rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and tension in their wake. "What proposition?" Lillian asked once they were out of earshot. Mrs. Potter's mouth formed a grim line. "Warner's been trying to buy Triple Creek for months now. Says it would be more efficient to combine operations, but really he just wants to control all the water sources in this part of the territory." She shook her head. "That man has never seen a piece of land he didn't want to own or a person he didn't want to control. And he clearly has no love for my uncle," Lillian observed. "Your uncle's newspaper has been documenting Warner's more questionable tactics. Small homesteaders finding their fences cut, their livestock scattered. Mysterious fires. Nothing that can be proven, of course, but everyone knows." Lillian felt a growing unease. What had seemed like an adventure coming west to help her uncle with his newspaper was revealing itself to be potentially dangerous. Yet instead of fear, she felt a surprising surge of determination. If her uncle was fighting for justice, she wanted to be part of that effort. "Mrs. Potter, would you mind telling me more about the situation here? If I'm to help my uncle, I should understand what he's facing." The older woman regarded her thoughtfully, then nodded. "Let's go inside. This isn't a conversation for open air." Over cups of strong coffee at the kitchen table, Mrs. Potter outlined the rising tensions in the territory. The railroad's arrival 5 years earlier had changed everything, making it profitable to ship cattle east and bringing waves of settlers seeking their own piece of land. The vast open ranges were increasingly divided by fences and claims, threatening the traditional power of the first cattle barons who had established themselves decades earlier. Men like Warner came west when it was still wild, built empires with their own hands and sometimes their own brand of justice, Mrs. Potter explained. They don't take kindly to change, especially when it threatens their authority. And my uncle's newspaper gives voice to those challenging that authority, Lillian surmised. Exactly. Miles Dawson has never been afraid to print the truth as he sees it, even when it makes powerful men uncomfortable. Mrs. Potter poured more coffee. "Mr. Hargrove, he owns Triple Creek. He's tried to stay neutral, focus on running his ranch honestly. But Warner doesn't accept neutrality. You're either with him or against him." The conversation continued through the afternoon, with Mrs. Potter sharing the complex history of the region. As the sun began to lower in the sky, they heard riders approaching again. This time, it was Ethan returning with his men, their expressions grim as they dismounted. Ethan came directly to the porch where Lillian had returned to rest her ankle. The day in the saddle had left him dusty and tired, but his eyes were alert with concern. "Warner was here," he stated rather than asked, looking between Lillian and Mrs. Potter. "Word travels fast," Mrs. Potter replied. "Yes, with his usual charm and subtlety." Ethan removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I passed his men on the way back. Should have known he'd come sniffing around while we were dealing with the rustling." "Did you find your missing cattle?" Lillian asked. "Signs of about 20 head being driven north, toward the hills where tracking gets difficult," Ethan explained. "Too much time had passed to follow effectively." He hesitated, then asked, "What did Warner want?" Mrs. Potter exchanged a glance with Lillian. "He asked for Mr. Hargrove, then made thinly veiled threats against Miss Dawson's uncle." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I was afraid of that. The situation in town is getting tense. That's why I wanted to get word to your uncle quickly." "You've been to Willow Creek already?" Lillian asked, surprised. "Sent one of the hands with a message while we tracked the rustlers," Ethan explained. "Your uncle's response was immediate." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "He sent this for you." Lillian unfolded the note, recognizing her uncle's bold handwriting. "Lillian, sorry to hear of your accident. Stay at Triple Creek until you're well enough to travel. Don't come to town yet. Situation volatile. Will explain everything when it's safer. Your loving uncle." Miles. Lillian looked up from the note, confusion and concern warring within her. "What's happening in town that would make him warn me away?" Ethan's expression grew serious. "Your uncle's latest editorial exposed how Warner and some other big ranchers have been manipulating water rights records at the land office. The territorial judge is coming next week to investigate. Warner's men have been making their presence known in town, intimidating anyone who might testify. And my uncle is right in the middle of it," Lillian concluded, a knot forming in her stomach. "Miles Dawson doesn't back down easily," Ethan said, something like reluctant admiration in his voice. "But he's making powerful enemies." As twilight settled over the ranch, Lillian found herself facing a dilemma. Her uncle clearly wanted her to stay away from town for now, but everything she was learning made her more concerned for his safety. She was torn between respecting his wishes and rushing to his side, injured ankle or not. That evening after dinner, Ethan found her on the porch again, staring pensively at the darkening landscape. "You're worried about him," Ethan observed, leaning against the porch railing. "Wouldn't you be?" "He's my only family," Lillian replied. "And it sounds like he's in danger for simply printing the truth." "The truth is a luxury some believe they can't afford," Ethan said quietly. "When millions of dollars and generations of power are at stake, men like Warner will do whatever it takes to protect what they see as theirs." "What would you do?" Lillian asked suddenly, turning to face him. "If you were in my position," Ethan considered the question seriously. "I'd respect his wishes for now," he finally said. "Your uncle has survived in this territory for years because he's careful despite his bold words. If he says it's not safe for you in town right now, he has his reasons." "But I can't just sit here doing nothing," Lillian protested. "Maybe you don't have to." Ethan straightened up, an idea forming. "Your uncle sent for you to help with the newspaper, right? What if you started gathering information right here?" "What do you mean?" Triple Creek hands travel all over the territory. They hear things, see things. "With Mr. Hargrove's permission, you could interview them, document the incidents of water rights violations, fence cutting, all the things your uncle's been writing about. Build a stronger case for when the judge arrives." Lillian's eyes widened as she considered the possibility. "That's actually a brilliant idea. I could be useful without putting myself in harm's way." "And give your ankle proper time to heal," Ethan added with a small smile. Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, and Lillian felt a flutter of connection that went beyond their shared concerns. There was something about Ethan Calloway that drew her: his quiet strength, his thoughtfulness, the way he seemed to truly see her as a capable person rather than just a helpless Eastern lady. "Thank you," she said softly, "for understanding, and for not telling me to just stay out of it altogether." "I suspect telling Lillian Dawson to stay out of anything would be about as effective as telling the sun not to rise," he replied, his voice warm with something that might have been admiration. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Mrs. Potter called from inside that she'd prepared hot chocolate, breaking the spell. As they turned to go in, Ethan briefly touched Lillian's elbow to steady her on her injured ankle. The simple contact sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the mild evening air. That night, Lillian added several pages to her journal, organizing her thoughts about all she'd learned and planning how to gather the information that might help her uncle's cause. If Maxwell Warner thought he could intimidate the Dawson family into silence, he was about to learn otherwise. And if her growing feelings for a certain ranch foreman complicated matters, well, that was something to examine another day. The next morning brought unexpected news. Mr. Hargrove, the owner of Triple Creek, would be returning that afternoon, a day earlier than planned. The ranch hands buzzed with speculation about whether this early return was related to the recent cattle rustling or Warner's visit. Ethan seemed more concerned than excited about his employer's imminent arrival. When Lillian asked him about it while they shared breakfast on the porch, he chose his words carefully. "Mr. Hargrove is a good man, fair to his workers, honest in his business dealings," Ethan explained. "But he's also a practical man who's built this ranch from nothing. He doesn't like anything that threatens what he's created." "And my presence might be seen as a threat," Lillian guessed. Ethan nodded reluctantly. "Your connection to your uncle puts you in the middle of a situation Mr. Hargrove has been trying to avoid taking sides on." "I see." Lillian considered this. "Perhaps I should make arrangements to leave as soon as possible. I wouldn't want to put your position at risk." "No," Ethan said quickly, then moderated his tone. "That is, I don't think that's necessary." Mr. Hargrove respects the tradition of hospitality, especially for someone injured. I just wanted you to understand that he might be reserved. Lillian smiled at his concern. I'm quite accustomed to reserved men, Mr. Calloway. Boston society specializes in them. This drew a chuckle from Ethan, lightening the moment. Somehow I suspect Boston's reserved gentlemen are a different breed from Frederick Hargrove, but I appreciate your understanding. After breakfast, Ethan needed to attend to ranch matters, so Lillian spent the morning with Mrs. Potter, learning more about the household operations of a working ranch. Her ankle was improving, allowing her to move around the house with only a slight limp as long as she was careful. Around midday, she was helping to prepare lunch when the sound of an approaching buggy drew their attention. Through the kitchen window, Lillian saw a well-appointed carriage pulling up to the house, driven by a man who could only be Frederick Hargrove. He was older than she had expected, perhaps in his early 60s, with a full head of white hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His clothing, while practical for ranch life, was of obvious quality. As he descended from the buggy, Ethan appeared from the direction of the barns to greet him. Mrs. Potter wiped her hands on her apron. "That's my cue. Mr. Hargrove will want refreshment after his journey." "Let me help," Lillian offered, but Mrs. Potter shook her head. "Better for you to wait in the parlor. Let me explain your presence before you meet him." Lillian agreed, retreating to the comfortable parlor at the front of the house. Through the partially open door, she could hear the men's voices as they entered, though not their exact words. The tone seemed serious but not tense. After a few minutes, Mrs. Potter appeared at the parlor door. "Mr. Hargrove would like to meet you, Miss Dawson," she announced. Lillian rose, smoothing her skirt nervously, and followed Mrs. Potter to Hargrove's study. Inside, the ranch owner was seated behind a substantial desk, while Ethan stood nearby, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Dawson," Hargrove said, rising politely as she entered. "Ethan has explained your situation. I'm sorry to hear about your accident." "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Hargrove," Lillian replied. "Everyone has been most kind. I hope my presence hasn't been an imposition." Hargrove gestured for her to take a seat. "Not at all. Triple Creek has always welcomed travelers in need of assistance." He studied her thoughtfully. "Ethan tells me you're Miles Dawson's niece." "Yes, sir. I've come from Boston to help with his newspaper." Hargrove's expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Your uncle is a man of strong convictions. He believes in the power of truth to create positive change," Lillian said carefully. "Truth is rarely simple out here, Miss Dawson," Hargrove replied. "What seems clear-cut from a newspaper office can look very different when your livelihood depends on navigating complex relationships." Lillian sensed the underlying message. "You're worried my uncle's campaign against certain ranching practices threatens your operation as well." Hargrove's eyebrows rose slightly, perhaps surprised by her directness. "I run an honest ranch, Miss Dawson, but I also understand that survival in this territory requires cooperation among established operations. Your uncle's crusade is disrupting a delicate balance. A balance that seems to favor the powerful at the expense of smaller landholders," Lillian observed, then immediately worried she'd overstepped. To her surprise, Hargrove smiled faintly. "You're definitely Miles Dawson's blood, same fearlessness in expressing opinions." He leaned forward. "Let me be clear, Miss Dawson. I have no quarrel with your uncle's principles, only his methods. Antagonizing men like Maxwell Warner outright is dangerous not just for your uncle, but for everyone associated with him." Ethan cleared his throat. "Mr. Hargrove, I've suggested to Miss Dawson that she might gather information from our hands about what they've witnessed regarding water rights violations and other issues." Information that could help build a case for the territorial judge without directly involving Triple Creek. Hargrove looked thoughtful. That's actually not a bad idea. Documentation from multiple sources would be more compelling than just your uncle's editorials. He turned back to Lillian. You understand that any such information gathering would need to be discreet. If Warner suspected Triple Creek of actively supporting your uncle's cause. I understand completely, Lillian assured him, and I would ensure that nothing could be traced back to your ranch or your men. Hargrove studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. You may stay until your ankle is fully healed and Ethan can help arrange for you to speak with any hands who are willing. But, he added firmly, if the situation in town escalates further, we may need to reconsider. Thank you, sir, Lillian said sincerely. I appreciate your understanding. After she was dismissed, Lillian returned to the parlor, feeling a mixture of relief and renewed purpose. Hargrove hadn't been as resistant as Ethan had feared, though his caution was evident. Perhaps he wasn't as neutral in this conflict as he wanted to appear. Later that afternoon, Ethan found her on the porch, where she was making notes about potential questions for the ranch hands. That went better than expected, he said, settling into a chair beside her. Mr. Hargrove seems reasonable if cautious, Lillian agreed. He's a good man caught in a difficult position, Ethan explained. He built this place through hard work and fair dealing, but he's also had to coexist with the likes of Warner for decades. It's a balancing act. And now I'm complicating that balance, Lillian said ruefully. Maybe in a good way, Ethan suggested. Sometimes things need to be shaken up a bit for justice to prevail. Lillian looked at him with new appreciation. You sound like you might actually agree with my uncle's cause, Mr. Calloway. Ethan's eyes met hers, serious and direct. I believe in fairness, Miss Dawson. I've seen too many good people driven off their land because they couldn't fight the power of men like Warner. If documenting those injustices can help change things, I'm willing to take some risks. The conviction in his voice stirred something in Lillian, admiration certainly, but also a deeper connection. Here was a man who understood principle, who wasn't afraid to stand for what was right despite the potential cost. Thank you, she said softly, for helping me, for understanding why this matters. We'll start tomorrow, he promised. I'll arrange for you to speak with some of the hands who have witnessed Warner's tactics firsthand. Together, we might be able to build a case even Warner can't intimidate his way out of. As the sun began to set over the mountains, casting long shadows across the ranch, Lillian felt a new sense of purpose and a growing awareness that her feelings for Ethan Calloway were developing into something deeper than mere gratitude or admiration. Over the next 3 days, Lillian interviewed several Triple Creek ranch hands about what they'd witnessed on their travels throughout the territory. Their accounts formed a disturbing pattern. Small homesteaders finding their fences cut and cattle scattered, mysterious fires destroying barns and equipment, streams suddenly diverted away from smaller properties, and intimidation of anyone who complained too loudly. Most troubling were the stories about the Territorial Land Office, where records of water rights had reportedly been altered to favor the big ranchers. According to one older hand who had been in the territory for decades, original claim documents had disappeared entirely, replaced with newer versions that changed boundary lines and access rights. Lillian meticulously documented everything, organizing the accounts and cross-referencing details to build a comprehensive picture of systematic abuse of power. Each evening, she shared her findings with Ethan, who often added context or suggested additional questions to pursue. These evening sessions on the porch became the highlight of her days. As they worked together, The professional collaboration gradually shifted to more personal conversations. Ethan told her about his childhood in Virginia, his experiences during the war, and his journey west seeking a new beginning. Lillian shared stories of her life in Boston, her aspirations as a writer, and her determination to forge a path different from what society expected of women. On the fourth evening, their conversation extended well past sunset. Mrs. Potter had discreetly provided them with lemonade and then retired, leaving them alone in the gathering darkness. Only a small lamp on the table between them illuminated their faces. "Your ankle seems much improved," Ethan observed as Lillian shifted in her chair, extending her leg. "Yes, nearly healed," she confirmed. "I should be able to travel to town soon." A shadow crossed Ethan's face. "The situation there hasn't improved. Your uncle sent word today that Warner's men have been loitering outside the newspaper office, intimidating anyone who tries to enter." Lillian frowned. "All the more reason I should go. He shouldn't face this alone." "Or all the more reason you should stay here, where it's safe," Ethan countered, leaning forward. "At least until the territorial judge arrives next week." "I didn't come all the way from Boston to hide on a ranch while my uncle faces danger," Lillian said firmly. Ethan studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "You're as stubborn as your horse, you know that." This unexpected comparison startled a laugh from Lillian. "I'm not sure whether to be flattered or offended." "It was definitely meant as a compliment," Ethan assured her, his smile visible in the lamplight. "That mare of yours has spirit. So do you." Their eyes met across the small table, and something in the air between them shifted. The professional partnership that had been developing alongside their friendship suddenly seemed charged with new possibility. "Ethan," Lillian began, then hesitated, uncertain how to express the feelings that had been growing within her. He saved her from having to find the words by reaching across the table and gently taking her hand. "I know we've only known each other a short time," he said quietly, "but I've never met anyone quite like you, Lillian Dawson." The sound of her first name on his lips sent a thrill through her. "Nor I you," she admitted. "When you first came here, I thought you were just another Eastern lady who'd soon be overwhelmed by the realities of the frontier," he continued. "I've never been happier to be proven wrong. And I thought you were just another cowboy with more brawn than brain," she teased gently. "I've never been happier to be proven wrong either." His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. "Whatever happens with your uncle's cause with Warner and the others, I want you to know that I'll stand with you, not just because it's right, but because—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Because," Lillian prompted softly. "Because I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "And that terrifies and exhilarates me in equal measure." The declaration hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Lillian felt her heart beating rapidly as she squeezed his hand. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I never expected to find someone like you here." The moment stretched between them, full of new possibility. Then, with deliberate slowness, Ethan stood and moved around the table. He knelt beside her chair, one hand still holding hers, the other gently touching her face. "May I?" he asked, his eyes never leaving hers. In answer, Lillian leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with shared emotion. His hand cradled her face as if she were something precious, and she reached up to touch his hair, reveling in its softness between her fingers. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I found you in the dust that first day," he admitted. "Even with my hair full of dirt and my dignity thoroughly compromised," she teased. "Especially then," he replied with a soft laugh. "You looked up at me with those determined eyes, more concerned about your horse than your own injuries. I think I started falling right then." A noise from inside the house, Mrs. Potter moving about in the kitchen, reminded them of where they were. Ethan reluctantly straightened up, though he kept hold of Lillian's hand. "We should probably continue this conversation tomorrow," he suggested, "when we're less likely to scandalize Mrs. Potter." Lillian nodded, though she was reluctant for the evening to end. "Tomorrow, then." As they said good night at the foot of the stairs, Ethan brushed one more gentle kiss against her lips. "Sweet dreams, Lillian Dawson." She floated up to her room, her heart lighter than it had been in years despite all the challenges that still lay ahead. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The peaceful moment was shattered just after dawn when the sound of approaching riders roused the household. Lillian, already awake and dressed, looked out her window to see a group of men galloping toward the ranch house. One of them slumped forward in his saddle, clearly injured. She hurried downstairs, reaching the front door just as Ethan emerged from his quarters in the attached foreman's cabin. Their eyes met briefly, his expression conveying both happiness at seeing her and concern about the approaching riders. "Stay inside," he instructed before striding toward the approaching men. Lillian ignored this, following him onto the porch. As the riders drew closer, she recognized one of them as a young hand named Tommy, who had shared particularly useful information about water rights violations during her interviews. "What happened?" Ethan demanded as the men dismounted, helping their injured companion from his horse. "Ambushed on the north ridge," one of the men explained, his face grim. "We were checking fences when riders came out of nowhere, started shooting without warning. The injured man was conscious but pale, blood seeping through a makeshift bandage on his upper arm. They weren't rustlers," he managed to say. "They were Warner's men. I recognized Pete Simmons among them." Ethan's expression hardened. "Get him inside. Mrs. Potter can tend to that wound while I fetch the doctor from town." As they helped the injured man toward the house, Mr. Hargrove appeared, hastily dressed. "What's the meaning of this?" One of the hands quickly explained the situation. Hargrove's face darkened with each word. "This is a direct attack on Triple Creek," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Warner's gone too far this time." "Sir," Ethan said carefully, "we don't know for certain, don't we?" Hargrove cut him off. "After his visit here, after learning about Miss Dawson's presence and her connection to Miles Dawson, this is Warner sending a message." Lillian stepped forward. "If that's true, then it's my presence that has brought this trouble to your door. I should leave immediately." "No," both Ethan and Hargrove said simultaneously, surprising each other. Hargrove continued, "If this is Warner's doing, it changes everything. I've tried to stay neutral in this conflict, but attacking my men on my land crosses a line no rancher can tolerate." "What will you do?" Lillian asked. "For now, increase patrols and ensure everyone rides in pairs," Hargrove decided. "Ethan, after you fetch the doctor, I want you to take a message to Sheriff Taylor in town. It's time law enforcement took these incidents seriously." "And should I continue to Willow Creek with Miss Dawson?" Ethan asked. "Her ankle's nearly healed and her uncle will be concerned." Hargrove considered this, then nodded. "Yes, but take the South Road and go armed. If Warner's men are watching the trails, they might try to intercept you." The gravity of the situation struck Lillian forcefully. What had begun as a journalistic investigation was rapidly escalating into open conflict. And now people were being hurt possibly because of her presence at Triple Creek. While the injured man was being tended to, Ethan prepared for the journey to town. Lillian packed her few belongings and joined him in the yard where he was saddling their horses. "Are you certain you want to do this today?" he asked quietly as he tightened Penny's cinch. "We could wait a few more days, see if tensions ease." "I think we both know they won't," Lillian replied. "And my uncle needs to know what's happening. These accounts I've gathered could be crucial evidence for the territorial judge." Ethan nodded, his expression serious. "Just stay close to me on the trail, and if there's trouble, I'll do exactly as you say," she promised. "I may be determined, but I'm not foolhardy." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That remains to be seen, Miss Dawson." Despite the danger, Lillian felt a thrill at the thought of riding beside Ethan, of facing whatever came next together. Their relationship had transformed so quickly from strangers to allies, to something much deeper, something she treasured all the more for its unexpected nature. They set out after Ethan had spoken with the doctor, and delivered Hargrove's message to the ranch hands about increased vigilance. The morning was clear and cool, perfect for traveling, though Lillian couldn't help scanning the surrounding landscape nervously as they rode. Ethan led them on a circuitous route, avoiding the main trails and keeping to areas with good visibility. They rode mostly in silence, both alert for any sign of trouble. About halfway to town, they stopped in a small grove of cottonwoods beside a stream to rest the horses. As Lillian stretched her legs, still a bit stiff from the healing ankle, Ethan kept watch from a position that allowed him to see in all directions. "You really think Warner would attack us on the open road?" she asked, joining him. "I think Warner is a man who's accustomed to getting his way," Ethan replied carefully. "And right now, your uncle's newspaper and the coming investigation are threatening everything he's built. Desperate men do desperate things." "Yet you're still helping me," Lillian observed. "Even knowing the risk." Ethan's eyes met hers, serious and determined. "Some things are worth the risk. Justice, truth." He paused, then added softly, "You." The simple declaration warmed her heart. Before she could respond, however, Ethan suddenly tensed, his gaze fixed on a point in the distance. "Riders," he said quietly. "Coming fast from the north. Get back to the horses." They mounted quickly, Ethan helping Lillian up before swinging into his own saddle. "We'll head for that ridgeline," he decided, pointing southeast. "If it's Warner's men, they'll have to circle around to follow us, which will give us time." They set off at a brisk pace, not quite galloping but moving with purpose. Lillian glanced back and saw the distant riders changing course to intercept them. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination. "They've seen us," she called to Ethan. He nodded grimly. "We'll have to make a run for it. Stay close." They urged their horses to a full gallop, racing across the open grassland toward the distant ridge. Lillian's hair came loose from its pins, streaming behind her as Penny stretched out, seemingly understanding the urgency. Despite the danger, Lillian felt a wild exhilaration, riding beside Ethan, both of them bent low over their horses' necks as they flew across the landscape. The pursuing riders were gaining, however. Ethan led them into a stand of trees, hoping to use the terrain to their advantage. As they weaved through the pines, Lillian heard the crack of a gunshot and the splintering of bark nearby. "They're shooting at us," she called out, disbelieving. "Keep going," Ethan shouted back. "The ridge is just ahead." They broke from the trees onto a rocky slope. Ethan's horse, sure-footed and experienced, picked its way upward without hesitation. Penny followed, but as they neared the top, her hoofs slipped on loose shale. The mare stumbled, regained her footing, then lurched awkwardly as more rocks gave way beneath her. Lillian felt herself sliding sideways in the saddle. She clutched at the pommel, trying to stay mounted, but the angle was too severe. For the second time since arriving in Montana, she found herself thrown from her horse, tumbling through the air before landing hard on the rocky ground. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs. She lay stunned, aware of hoofbeats approaching and the sound of Ethan calling her name. Dust clouded her vision, rocks dug into her back, and for a moment she thought the pursuers had reached her. Then Ethan was there, kneeling beside her in the dust, his face a mask of concern. "Lillian, are you hurt?" His hands gently checked for injuries, cradling her head. "Just winded," she managed to gasp. "Penny, she's fine, just spooked. Can you stand?" With his help, Lillian got to her feet, wincing at new bruises but finding nothing seriously injured. The sound of approaching riders spurred Ethan to action. "We need to reach the top of the ridge," he said urgently. "There's an old line shack just over it where we can take cover." "What about the horses? We'll have to leave them. They'll be fine, they'll probably head back to the ranch once things quiet down." Taking her hand, Ethan led her upward, scrambling over the loose rocks toward the ridgeline. Behind them, the pursuers had reached the base of the slope and were dismounting to follow on foot. Almost there, Ethan encouraged as they neared the top. Another shot rang out, the bullet whining off rocks uncomfortably close to them. They crested the ridge and half ran, half slid down the other side, where a small, weathered cabin stood in a protected hollow. Ethan practically dragged Lillian the last few yards, pushing open the door and pulling her inside before barring it behind them. The interior was dim and dusty, containing only basic furnishings: a small table, a couple of chairs, a rudimentary stove, and a narrow cot. Ethan immediately moved to the single window, peering out cautiously. "They're coming over the ridge," he reported, drawing his revolver. "5 of them." "What do we do?" Lillian asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. Ethan's expression was grim but determined. "I'll try to reason with them first. If that fails..." He checked his ammunition. "I have enough rounds to make them think twice about storming the cabin." He positioned himself near the window, then called out, "That's far enough. We're armed in here." The approaching men stopped, conferring among themselves. One of them, a burly man with a bushy mustache, stepped forward. "We just want the woman," he shouted back. "Send her out, and you can ride away, Cowboy." "Not going to happen," Ethan replied firmly. "You boys turn around and tell Warner that attacking innocent travelers is going to bring the territorial marshals down on his head." The man laughed. "There ain't no marshals for 50 miles, and the local sheriff knows which side his bread is buttered on. Last chance, send out the Dawson woman." "Go to hell," Ethan answered, then ducked back as a volley of shots splintered the window frame. Lillian crouched low, heart pounding as bullets thudded into the cabin's wooden walls. Ethan returned fire sparingly, aiming to keep the attackers at bay rather than hit them. During a lull in the shooting, he moved to Lillian's side. "There's a back window," he whispered. "If I create a diversion, you might be able to slip out and make it to the trees beyond." "I'm not leaving you," she said firmly. "Lillian, no," she interrupted. "We stay together. There must be another way." Before Ethan could respond, a new sound reached them: hoofbeats, many of them, approaching rapidly from the east. The shooting outside stopped as the attackers also heard the newcomers. Ethan risked a glance out the damaged window. "It's Hargrove," he said, relief evident in his voice. "And at least a dozen hands with him." The tables quickly turned. Outnumbered and outflanked, Warner's men retreated hastily, scrambling back over the ridge to their horses. Ethan unbarred the cabin door as Hargrove and his men approached. "Are you both all right?" Hargrove demanded as he dismounted. "A bit battered but unharmed," Ethan confirmed, his hand finding Lillian's as they stepped outside together. "How did you know where to find us?" "Your horses came back to the ranch riderless," Hargrove explained. "Given what happened this morning, I gathered every available hand and set out to search. We heard the gunfire and followed it." His expression was grim. "This changes everything. Warner has declared war not just on your uncle's newspaper, Miss Dawson, but on Triple Creek as well." One of the hands approached, leading 2 spare horses. "For you to continue to town," he explained. Hargrove nodded. "Yes, you need to reach Willow Creek and inform the sheriff officially about this attack. I'll send men to track Warner's thugs, gather evidence of their involvement." As they prepared to depart again, this time with an escort of 4 armed ranch hands, Ethan pulled Lillian aside for a moment of privacy. "You could have been killed today," he said quietly, his eyes intense. "Because of me, because I brought you into this." "I chose to be part of this fight," Lillian reminded him, "and I'd choose it again." She reached up to touch his face gently. "Besides, you were there to catch me when I fell." A smile touched his lips at the reference to their first meeting. "I promised I would." "And you kept that promise," she said softly. "As I intend to keep mine to stand with you and my uncle against injustice, no matter the risk." Ethan's hand covered hers where it rested against his cheek. "When this is over," he said quietly, "when Warner is exposed and the territorial judge has ruled." "What then, Lillian Dawson? Will you stay in Montana?" The question held so many implications, so much hope and uncertainty. Lillian met his gaze steadily. "That depends," she replied. "Would a certain ranch foreman have reason to want me to stay?" "Every reason in the world," Ethan answered, his voice husky with emotion. They might have said more, might have sealed those words with a kiss, but Hargrove called that it was time to move out. The conversation would have to wait until they reached the safety of town. But as they rode side by side, surrounded by their armed escort, Lillian felt a certainty growing within her heart. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she and Ethan would face them together. And when the dust settled, they would build something new and beautiful from the ashes of conflict. The ride to Willow Creek passed without further incident, though tension remained high. Their escort of ranch hands maintained vigilant watch, scanning the horizon constantly for any sign of Warner's men. By mid-afternoon, they crested a hill that offered their first view of the town, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a main street, with scattered houses extending outward like ripples in a pond. "It's not much compared to Boston," Ethan said, noting Lillian's intense study of the settlement. "It has its own charm," she replied. "And it represents something important: civilization taking root, people building a community together." Ethan smiled at her perspective. "Your uncle said something similar when he first arrived and decided to start his newspaper. He saw potential where most just saw a dusty frontier town." As they rode down the main street, Lillian absorbed the details of her new home: the general store with its wooden porch lined with rocking chairs, the saloon with its swinging doors, the small church at one end of town, and near the center, a 2-story building with a sign proclaiming it the office of the Willow Creek Herald. People stopped to watch their procession, clearly recognizing the Triple Creek hands and noting the unusual sight of an armed escort. Ethan led them directly to a small building with "Sheriff" painted on a weathered sign. As they dismounted, a broad-shouldered man with a gray streaked mustache emerged, eyeing them with cautious interest. "Calloway," he acknowledged. "This looks serious." "It is, Sheriff Taylor," Ethan confirmed. "We need to report an armed attack on Triple Creek personnel." The sheriff's eyes moved to Lillian, taking in her dusty appearance and the obvious signs of her recent tumble. "And this would be Lillian Dawson," she introduced herself. "Miles Dawson's niece." A flicker of recognition crossed the sheriff's face. "I see. Better come inside then." In the sparse office, they recounted the morning's events: the attack on Triple Creek hands, their journey toward town, and the ambush at the ridge. Sheriff Taylor listened without interrupting, making occasional notes, his expression revealing little. "And you're certain these were Warner's men?" he asked when they finished. "One of our injured hands recognized Pete Simmons among the attackers this morning," Ethan explained. "And the men who pursued us specifically demanded the Dawson woman by name." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, contemplative. "That's troubling, but not conclusive proof Warner ordered it. Simmons and his crowd are known troublemakers. They could have been acting on their own initiative." "With respect, Sheriff," Lillian interjected, "that seems unlikely given the timing and specificity of their demands." "They knew who I was and my connection to my uncle's newspaper." Taylor's gaze sharpened. "Miss Dawson, I understand you're new to our territory, but things work differently here than in the East. Accusations against a man of Warner's standing require absolute proof." "Which is exactly what my uncle has been gathering," Lillian countered, reaching into her satchel for the notebooks containing her interviews. "And what I've been documenting as well. Multiple witnesses have described a pattern of intimidation and illegal activities linked to Warner's operations." The sheriff's eyes flicked to the notebooks but made no move to take them. "The territorial judge arrives next week. That's the proper venue for such evidence." "And if Warner's men attack again before then?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Will you at least increase patrols in town, offer some protection to the newspaper office?" Taylor sighed. "I have 3 deputies for the entire county, Calloway, but yes, I'll have someone check on the newspaper office more frequently." He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "I'll document your report and look into these allegations. That's all I can promise for now." Outside, the Triple Creek hands were waiting with the horses. Ethan conferred with them briefly, instructing 2 to return to the ranch with news of their safe arrival while the other 2 would remain in town overnight as additional protection. "Now to your uncle's," Ethan said to Lillian. "He'll be anxious to see you." The newspaper office was just a short ride down the street. As they approached, Lillian noted the building's sturdy construction, a deliberate choice, she suspected, given the controversial nature of her uncle's journalism. A printing press was visible through the front window, and a bell jingled as they entered. "Be with you in a moment," called a voice from the back room. A moment later, a man appeared, wiping ink-stained hands on a rag. He was taller than Lillian remembered, his once dark hair now almost completely silver, but his piercing blue eyes so like her own were unchanged. "Uncle Miles," Lillian said, emotion suddenly tightening her throat. Miles Dawson froze, then a broad smile transformed his serious face. "Lillian." "My dear girl," he rushed forward, embracing her tightly. "When I heard about your accident, I was so worried, and then with everything happening in town." He pulled back to examine her. "You're dusty, and is that blood on your sleeve? It's been an eventful journey," Lillian admitted. "We have much to tell you," Miles nodded to Ethan. "Calloway, thank you for bringing her safely. I'm in your debt." "No debt, sir," Ethan replied, "but we should talk privately. There have been developments you need to know about." Understanding the seriousness of the situation, Miles led them through the newspaper office to a back staircase that ascended to his living quarters above. The space was cluttered but comfortable, bookshelves overflowing with volumes, papers stacked on every surface, and framed newspaper headlines decorating the walls. A pot of coffee sat warming on a small stove. As Miles poured them each a cup, Lillian and Ethan took turns explaining everything that had transpired from her initial fall and stay at Triple Creek to the interviews she'd conducted, Warner's visit to the ranch, and finally, the attacks that day. Miles listened intently, his expression growing increasingly grave. When they finished, he sat in silence for a long moment, absently stroking his mustache. "It's worse than I feared," he finally said. "Warner's getting desperate if he's willing to resort to open violence." He looked at Lillian with concern. "I never meant to bring you into danger, my dear. Perhaps you should take the next stage east." "Absolutely not," Lillian interrupted firmly. "I came here to help you with the newspaper, and that's exactly what I intend to do, especially now." "Lillian," Miles began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "I've spent the last year in Boston feeling purposeless after losing mother and father," she said. "Here, I've found something worth fighting for. And," she added with a quick glance at Ethan, "people worth standing beside." Miles caught the look that passed between them and raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment on it directly. Instead, he turned to the notebooks Lillian had placed on the table. "These interviews could be invaluable," he acknowledged. "Combined with the documentation I've been gathering, we might have enough to convince the territorial judge to act decisively against Warner and his allies. If we can keep the evidence and ourselves safe until the judge arrives," Ethan pointed out. Miles nodded soberly. "That's the challenge. Warner's influence runs deep in this county. The sheriff is reluctant to cross him, and several businessmen in town depend on Warner's ranch for their livelihood." "What about moving the evidence somewhere secure?" Lillian suggested. "Somewhere Warner wouldn't think to look." "That might be wise," Miles agreed. "I have a friend, Reverend Simmons, at the church. His cellar could provide a hiding place." He hesitated, then added, "There's another concern. I've received word that Warner's men have been watching the stage and all roads into town. They may try to prevent the judge from arriving. Mr. Hargrove might be willing to send men to escort the judge," Ethan suggested. "After today's attack, he's firmly against Warner." "A significant development," Miles noted. "Hargrove has always tried to remain neutral in local conflicts." Their planning continued as darkness fell. Eventually, they agreed that Lillian would stay with her uncle, helping to organize the evidence and prepare the newspaper's coverage of the coming investigation. Ethan would return to Triple Creek to coordinate with Hargrove about security measures and the potential escort for the judge. As the evening grew late, Miles tactfully excused himself to make up a bed for Lillian in the small spare room, giving her and Ethan a moment alone. "I don't like leaving you here," Ethan admitted quietly. "Even with your uncle and our men watching the building." "I'll be careful," Lillian promised. "And it's only for a few days. Once the judge arrives and the evidence is presented, Warner's power will be diminished." "Warner is a man who doesn't accept defeat easily," Ethan warned. "The most dangerous time might be just before the judge's ruling, when he realizes he's cornered." Lillian placed a hand on his arm. "All the more reason to see this through quickly. The sooner justice is served, the sooner we can." She hesitated, suddenly shy about referencing the future they had tentatively begun to envision together. Ethan covered her hand with his own. "The sooner we can begin something new," he finished for her. "Something I've been hoping for since a certain stubborn woman fell into the dust at my feet." "Fell is such an undignified word," Lillian protested with mock indignation. "I prefer to think of it as a dramatic entrance." Ethan laughed softly, then grew serious again. "Be safe, Lillian. I'll be back as soon as possible." "I will," she promised. "You be careful, too." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Lillian closed the distance, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both tender and filled with unspoken promises. When they parted, Ethan rested his forehead against hers briefly. "Until tomorrow," he whispered. After he left, Lillian stood at the window watching his figure disappear into the darkness, her heart full of both apprehension and hope. The days ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time in a long while, she felt truly alive, part of something important, connected to people who mattered deeply. Her uncle returned, a knowing look in his eyes, but thankfully no teasing comments about what he might have observed. Instead, he simply said, "That Calloway is a good man, one of the few around here who's always stood on principle even when it wasn't easy." "Yes," Lillian agreed. "I've noticed that about him." Miles smiled softly. "I'm glad you found something more than just a cause to fight for out here, Lillian. Your parents would be pleased." With that simple blessing, they bid each other good night, both aware that tomorrow would bring new challenges in their fight against corruption and injustice in the territory they both now called home. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Lillian threw herself into helping her uncle prepare the next edition of the newspaper, which would detail the pattern of water rights violations and intimidation tactics used by Warner and his allies. They worked carefully, ensuring every accusation was supported by multiple sources and documentation. Ethan returned from Triple Creek the following day with news that Hargrove had committed to sending 10 men to meet the territorial judge at the county line and escort him safely to town. This show of force, combined with the evidence Miles and Lillian had compiled, represented their best hope for finally breaking Warner's stranglehold on the region. As the day of the judge's arrival approached, tension in Willow Creek grew palpable. Warner's men were frequently seen riding through town, their presence a silent intimidation. The newspaper office was now guarded round the clock by a rotation of Triple Creek hands and local citizens who supported Miles's campaign against corruption. Lillian and Ethan found precious little time alone together, but their bond continued to strengthen through their shared purpose, and the stolen moments they managed to find brief walks to the church to check on the hidden evidence, quiet conversations on the newspaper office's back porch as the sun set, a touch of hands as they passed documents back and forth. On the eve of the judge's expected arrival, Miles hosted a small gathering of supporters at the newspaper office. Local shopkeepers, smaller ranchers, and homesteaders who had suffered under Warner's tactics. The mood was cautiously optimistic as they discussed what the investigation might reveal and the changes it could bring to the territory. As the meeting concluded and people began to disperse, Sheriff Taylor unexpectedly appeared at the door. His expression was grim as he asked to speak with Miles privately. Lillian and Ethan exchanged concerned glances, but remained as the sheriff delivered his news. "Just got word by telegraph," Taylor said without preamble. "Judge Sullivan's train was delayed in Helena. He won't arrive until day after tomorrow at the earliest." Miles frowned. "Is there any indication this delay was engineered?" Taylor shrugged. "The message cited mechanical problems with the train. Could be legitimate, could be someone's interference. Either way, it gives Warner more time to prepare or to act." "We should move the evidence again," Ethan suggested after the sheriff departed. "Change the hiding place just to be safe." Miles nodded agreement. "Perhaps the old Abbott place on the edge of town. It's been abandoned since the family moved on last year, but the root cellar is still sound." "I'll take care of it tonight," Ethan offered. "The fewer people who know the new location, the better." As darkness fell, Ethan and Lillian made their way discreetly to the church to retrieve the hidden documents. The night was unusually still, the town quieter than normal, which only heightened their sense of caution. "Something doesn't feel right," Ethan murmured as they approached the church. "It's too quiet." Lillian had been thinking the same thing. Perhaps everyone's just waiting to see what happens when the judge arrives. Perhaps. But Ethan's hand rested near his holstered revolver as they entered the church's side door, using the key Reverend Simmons had provided. The interior was dark save for moonlight filtering through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the wooden pews. They moved quietly toward the back where a small door led to the cellar stairs. As Ethan reached for the door handle, a floorboard creaked behind them. They whirled to find 3 men emerging from the shadows, guns drawn. Well, well, drawled a voice Lillian recognized from their encounter at the ridge. Pete Simmons. Looks like Warner was right about where you'd stashed them papers. Ethan stepped in front of Lillian protectively. You're making a mistake, Simmons. The territorial judge will be here soon. Adding church robbery and assault to your crimes won't help your case. Simmons laughed. Judge might have a hard time finding his way here at all. Trains have accidents. Roads get washed out. All kinds of things can happen to delay a man's travels. The implication was clear. Warner had no intention of allowing the judge to reach Willow Creek. Lillian felt a chill run through her. Now, Simmons continued, gesturing with his gun, you're going to open that cellar and get us them documents. Then we're all going for a little ride out of town. Mr. Warner wants to have a personal chat with the both of you. And if we refuse? Lillian asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Simmons's smile was cold. Then we only need one of you alive to open that cellar. Don't much matter to me which one. Ethan's posture shifted subtly. Lillian could feel the tension in him, knew he was calculating odds, looking for an opening. Their eyes met briefly, and she gave an almost imperceptible nod, understanding his silent message, be ready. All right, Ethan said, raising his hands in apparent surrender. No need for violence. I'll open the cellar. He turned slowly toward the door, Simmons and one of his men moving closer to watch. The third man kept his gun trained on Lillian. As Ethan reached for the handle, he suddenly dropped to one knee, drawing his revolver in a smooth motion and firing at the nearest attacker. Chaos erupted. Lillian dove behind a pew as gunshots echoed in the confined space. She heard a grunt of pain, but couldn't tell if it was Ethan or one of their attackers. Moving low between the pews, she made her way toward the front of the church, hoping to reach the door and summon help. A hand grabbed her ankle, yanking her backward. She kicked out instinctively, connecting with something solid. Her attacker cursed, but didn't release his grip. Lillian twisted, finding herself face to face with Simmons, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead but his eyes burning with rage. You Dawsons have caused enough trouble, he snarled, raising his gun. Before he could fire, another shot rang out and Simmons jerked, his expression changing to surprise, then emptiness as he collapsed. Behind him stood Ethan, his gun still raised, blood seeping from a wound in his left shoulder. Are you hurt? He asked urgently, helping Lillian to her feet. No, I'm all right, she assured him, though her heart was racing so hard she felt lightheaded. But you're bleeding. Just a graze, Ethan dismissed it, though his pallor suggested otherwise. We need to go. The shots will bring others, could be help, could be more of Warner's men. They hurried to the cellar, retrieving the hidden documents before slipping out the church's back door just as shouts and running footsteps approached from the direction of the main street. Rather than heading directly back to the newspaper office, Ethan led them through back alleys and between buildings, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen. By the time they reached the rear entrance of the newspaper building, Ethan's face was ashen, his shirt soaked with blood. Lillian helped him inside, calling for her uncle. Miles appeared immediately, his expression shifting from relief to alarm at the sight of Ethan's wound. Warner's men, Lillian explained quickly as they helped Ethan to a chair. They were waiting at the church. There was a gunfight. Miles was already moving to bolt the doors and close the shutters. Did anyone follow you? I don't think so, Ethan said through gritted teeth. Took a roundabout way. I'll fetch the doctor, Miles decided, reaching for his coat. Not yet, Ethan stopped him. Warner's men will be watching for movement, and the documents need to be secured first. He nodded to the satchel Lillian was still clutching. That evidence is more important than my shoulder. Lillian began to protest, but Miles interrupted. He's right about Warner's men watching, but wrong about priorities. I can tend to that wound for now. It's not my first bullet wound, unfortunately, and we'll get the doctor when it's safer. While Miles gathered medical supplies, Lillian helped Ethan remove his bloody shirt. The wound was a deep furrow across his shoulder, painful but not immediately life-threatening if properly cleaned and bandaged. Still, the sight of it, the knowledge that he had been hurt protecting her, made her throat tight with emotion. I think you've ruined my dramatic entrance as the most injured newcomer to the territory, she said lightly, trying to mask her concern as she bathed the wound with water. Ethan managed a pained smile. Just trying to keep up with you. Miles returned with bandages, alcohol, and a needle and thread. This will hurt, he warned before pouring alcohol over the wound. Ethan's entire body tensed, but he made no sound beyond a sharp intake of breath. As Miles prepared to stitch the wound, Ethan's eyes found Lillian's, focusing on her as if drawing strength from her presence. "Talk to me," he requested quietly. "Distract me." So she did, describing Boston in springtime, the books she loved, her dreams of writing stories that mattered, anything to keep his mind from the needle passing through his flesh. By the time Miles finished and wrapped the shoulder in clean bandages, Ethan was exhausted but still conscious. "You should rest," Lillian told him, helping him to the small sofa in her uncle's living room. "The documents," he protested weakly. "I'll take care of them," Miles assured him. "You focus on healing. We'll need you at full strength when the judge arrives." Once Ethan was settled, Miles and Lillian retreated to the kitchen to discuss their next steps. "Warner's getting desperate," Miles observed, keeping his voice low. "Attacking a church, threatening the judge's journey, these are the actions of a man who sees his power slipping away." "Which makes him all the more dangerous," Lillian agreed. "What do we do now?" Miles considered this. "We need to get word to Hargrove about the potential threat to the judge. And we should alert Sheriff Taylor about what happened at the church, though I doubt he'll take decisive action against Warner. And the evidence? We'll keep it here for now, hidden in the compartment beneath the printing press. Few people know it exists." They worked late into the night, reorganizing the documents and preparing a complete account of the church attack for the next day's newspaper. Lillian checked on Ethan frequently, relieved to find him sleeping, though his rest was clearly uneasy. Near dawn, as she dozed in a chair beside him, Ethan stirred and opened his eyes. "Lillian," he murmured. She was instantly alert. "I'm here. How are you feeling?" "Like I argued with the wrong end of a gun," he admitted with a weak attempt at humor. "But better." He reached for her hand. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better at the church." "You saved my life," Lillian reminded him, squeezing his fingers gently. "And we got the evidence out safely. That's what matters." Ethan's eyes, though pained, were clear and serious. "When I saw Simmons about to shoot you, I realized something. All this, the evidence, the judge exposing Warner, it's important, but not as important as you." He paused, gathering strength. "I love you, Lillian Dawson. Whatever happens next, I needed you to know that." The simple declaration, spoken in the quiet dawn light, filled Lillian's heart with a warmth that pushed aside all fears and uncertainties. She leaned forward, touching his face gently. "I love you too, Ethan Calloway," she whispered. "And when this is over, we'll build something beautiful together, something worth all the struggle." Their lips met in a tender kiss, a promise exchanged in the fragile peace before a new day of challenges began. Outside, the first hints of sunrise touched the eastern sky, illuminating Willow Creek as it prepared for what might be its most momentous day, a day that would determine not only the future of the territory, but the future of two people who had found each other in the most unexpected circumstances. The next day brought new complications. Word of the gunfight at the church spread quickly through town, with wildly varying accounts of what had happened. Sheriff Taylor investigated the scene, finding Simmons's body and evidence of the confrontation, but the other two attackers had vanished, presumably returned to Warner's ranch to report their failure. Miles's newspaper ran a detailed account of the incident, including the attempted theft of evidence and the implications of Warner's efforts to intimidate witnesses and possibly interfere with the judge's arrival. The edition sold out within hours, indicating the townsfolk's growing interest in the conflict. By afternoon, the town had divided into clear factions. Most merchants and townspeople aligned themselves with Miles Dawson and the promise of justice, while Warner's supporters, primarily men who worked for him or depended on his business, gathered at the saloon, their presence a silent threat. Ethan insisted on returning to Triple Creek despite his injury, arguing that he needed to ensure Hargrove's men were prepared to meet the judge's train the following day. Lillian was reluctant to see him go, but understood the necessity. "Just promise me you won't do anything reckless," she said as she helped him mount his horse, concerned about the strain on his injured shoulder. "Says the woman who challenged Warner's men in a church," Ethan replied with a wry smile. "I'm serious, Ethan. That wound needs time to heal properly." His expression softened. "I'll be careful, and I'll be back tomorrow with Hargrove's men to escort the judge from the station." After a brief, tender kiss that drew knowing looks from the Triple Creek hands who would accompany him, Ethan rode out. Lillian watched until he disappeared from view, then returned to the newspaper office to help her uncle prepare for the judge's arrival. Throughout the day, supporters came to offer assistance, bringing food, offering to stand watch, sharing additional information about Warner's activities over the years. Lillian was touched by the community's response, understanding now why her uncle had chosen to make his stand in this small frontier town. That evening, as she and Miles sorted through the final documentation to present to the judge, an unexpected visitor arrived. Sheriff Taylor, looking uncharacteristically concerned. "Just got word by telegraph," he announced without preamble. "Judge Sullivan's train will arrive on schedule tomorrow morning. But," he added grimly, "I've also received reports that Warner's gathered nearly 20 men at his ranch. They're armed and look to be preparing for something significant. An ambush." Miles suggested, voicing what they were all thinking. Taylor shrugged. "Could be. Or a show of force in town when the judge arrives. Either way, I've deputized several trustworthy men to help maintain order." "Will it be enough?" Lillian asked. The sheriff's expression was grim. "Honestly, I don't know. Warner's never gone this far before. We're in uncharted territory." After Taylor left, Miles and Lillian discussed contingency plans late into the night. If Warner attempted to prevent the judge from reaching town or tried to intimidate him once he arrived, they needed to be prepared. "Perhaps we should take the evidence directly to the train station," Lillian suggested. "Present it to the judge immediately upon his arrival." Miles considered this. It might be wise. The less time between the judge receiving the evidence and acting on it, the less opportunity for Warner to interfere. They finally retired well after midnight, both exhausted but determined. Lillian found sleep elusive, her mind filled with concerns about Ethan's injury, Warner's planned show of force, and the uncertain outcome of the next day's events. She rose before dawn, dressing carefully in her most professional attire, a navy blue traveling suit that had been the height of fashion in Boston the previous year. If she was to present evidence of corruption to a territorial judge, she wanted to appear as credible and serious as possible. Miles was already awake, brewing strong coffee and reviewing their documentation one final time. He looked up when she entered the kitchen, offering a proud smile. "You look ready to take on an entire corrupt system single-handedly," he observed. "Not single-handedly," Lillian corrected him. "With you, with Ethan, with everyone who stood against Warner's tactics." Miles nodded, his expression turning serious. "Whatever happens today, Lillian, I want you to know how grateful I am that you came west. Not just for your help with the newspaper and this investigation, but for bringing new purpose to an old man's life." "You're hardly old, Uncle Miles," Lillian protested. "Old enough to recognize a second chance when I see it," he replied. "And to recognize love when I see that too." At her slight blush, he continued, "Ethan Calloway is a good man, the kind this territory needs more of, principled, steadfast." "Yes," Lillian agreed simply. "He is." Their moment was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching, many of them, moving at a steady pace. Miles moved to the window, his expression changing to one of concern. "Warner's men," he said grimly. "At least a dozen, heading toward the train station." Lillian joined him at the window, watching the group of riders moving purposefully down the main street. "The train isn't due for hours yet." "They're positioning themselves," Miles realized. "Planning to control who can approach the judge when he arrives." This changed everything. If Warner's men surrounded the station, presenting the evidence directly to the judge as planned would be impossible. They needed a new strategy, and quickly. Just then, more hoofbeats sounded from the opposite direction. Turning to look out the back window, they saw a welcome sight: Ethan leading a group of Triple Creek riders, with Frederick Hargrove himself at his side. Lillian hurried to open the back door as they dismounted. Ethan approached immediately, his wounded shoulder obviously still painful but his determination undiminished. "Warner's moving his men into position around the station," he reported without preamble. "We saw," Miles confirmed. "How many men did you bring?" 15, Hargrove answered, stepping forward. "My best hands, all armed." The ranch owner's expression was resolute. "I've avoided taking sides in local disputes for decades, Dawson, but attacking my men, trying to steal evidence, threatening the course of justice, Warner's crossed too many lines." Miles extended his hand, which Hargrove shook firmly. "Your support means more than you know, Frederick." "What's the plan?" Ethan asked, his eyes meeting Lillian's briefly, conveying both his love and his concern. Miles outlined the situation: Warner's men positioned at the station, the judge's imminent arrival, and the critical importance of getting the evidence into the judge's hands before Warner could interfere. "We need a diversion," Hargrove suggested. "Something to draw Warner's attention while a smaller group gets the evidence to the judge." "Or," Lillian proposed thoughtfully, "what if we don't approach the station at all? What if we arrange for the judge to come to us instead?" All eyes turned to her as she explained her idea. Sheriff Taylor could meet the judge at the station officially, then escort him not to the courthouse as expected, but directly to the newspaper office where the evidence and witnesses were already gathered. Warner's men would be left watching an empty station while justice proceeded elsewhere. "It could work," Ethan agreed, "but someone needs to get word to Taylor immediately before Warner's men spot him." "I'll go," offered one of the younger Triple Creek hands. "I grew up here, know every back alley and shortcut in town." With the plan set in motion, they prepared for the judge's arrival. The evidence was organized for clear presentation, and key witnesses were discreetly summoned to the newspaper office. Outside, Most of Hargrove's men positioned themselves strategically around the building, while a few rode openly through town to give the impression they were all heading toward the station to confront Warner's forces. As the time of the train's arrival approached, tension in the newspaper office mounted. Lillian found herself repeatedly checking the street through gaps in the shuttered windows, watching for any sign of the sheriff and judge. Ethan moved to stand beside her, his presence reassuring despite his injured state. "It will work," he said quietly, reading her concern. "And if it doesn't," she asked, voicing the fear they all felt, "if Warner somehow prevents the judge from hearing the evidence?" "Then we find another way," Ethan replied with simple determination. "Justice doesn't depend on just one day or one judge. What you and your uncle have started here, exposing corruption, standing for what's right, that continues regardless." His confidence steadied her. Whatever happened in the coming hours, they would face it together. The connection between them, forged in danger and strengthened by shared purpose, had become the foundation upon which Lillian could imagine building a future. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see Sheriff Taylor approaching, accompanied by a distinguished-looking man in a formal suit who could only be Judge Sullivan. They were moving quickly, taking the back streets as planned, with 2 deputies following close behind. Miles opened the door as they reached the building, ushering them inside quickly. Brief introductions were made as the judge surveyed the assembled group with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Sheriff Taylor has given me a preliminary account of the situation," Judge Sullivan said, his voice carrying the authority of his position. "I understand there are serious allegations against Maxwell Warner and evidence to support them." "Yes, Your Honor," Miles confirmed. "We've documented a pattern of water rights violations, intimidation, and illegal tactics used to drive smaller landholders from their claims. And more recently, direct violence," Lillian added, gesturing toward Ethan's bandaged shoulder. "Including an attempt to steal the evidence and possibly prevent Your Honor from arriving safely." Judge Sullivan's expression remained neutral, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Serious charges indeed. I'll need to review all documentation thoroughly before taking any action." For the next 2 hours, the judge methodically examined the evidence, questioning witnesses and making detailed notes. His focus was intense, his questions precise. Lillian was impressed by his thoroughness and apparent impartiality. Finally, Judge Sullivan set down his pen and looked at Sheriff Taylor. "Based on the evidence presented, I am issuing an immediate warrant for Maxwell Warner's arrest on multiple charges, including water rights violations, intimidation, assault, and attempted obstruction of justice." A collective sigh of relief passed through the room. The judge had seen the truth in their evidence and was prepared to act. "Additionally," Sullivan continued, "I am ordering a complete audit of land office records and a review of all water rights claims in the county. Any falsified documents or improper registrations will be rectified." It was more than they had dared hope for, not just action against Warner personally, but a systematic addressing of the corrupt practices that had allowed him to accumulate power at others' expense. "Sheriff Taylor, please assemble your deputies to execute the warrant immediately," the judge instructed. "Mr. Hargrove, I would appreciate the assistance of your men in ensuring this proceeds without further violence." As the sheriff and Hargrove left to make arrangements, Judge Sullivan turned to Miles. "Your newspaper has performed a valuable public service, Mr. Dawson. Not many would have the courage to stand against such entrenched power." "My niece deserves much of the credit," Miles replied, nodding toward Lillian. "Her interviews and documentation provided crucial evidence." The judge regarded Lillian with new interest. "Impressive work, Miss Dawson. You have a future in investigative journalism if you choose to pursue it." "Thank you, Your Honor," Lillian replied, touched by the recognition. "I believe the written word can be a powerful force for positive change." "Indeed it can," Sullivan agreed. "And sometimes it requires brave individuals to wield that power." He glanced at his pocket watch. "Now, I believe we have an arrest to oversee." Word of Warner's impending arrest spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. By the time Sheriff Taylor and his newly expanded force of deputies and volunteers reached the main street, townspeople were gathering to witness what many had thought impossible: Maxwell Warner being held accountable for his actions. Lillian, Ethan, Miles, and Judge Sullivan watched from the newspaper office as the combined force of law enforcement and Triple Creek hands rode toward the hotel where Warner had established his temporary headquarters. The confrontation they all feared seemed inevitable. To everyone's surprise, however, Warner surrendered without resistance, perhaps recognizing that his influence had finally met its match in the territorial judge's authority, or perhaps calculating that a legal defense would be more effective than violent resistance. He allowed himself to be taken into custody with cold dignity. As he was led past the newspaper office toward the jail, Warner's eyes found Lillian standing beside Ethan in the doorway. His gaze burned with barely contained fury, but he said nothing as the deputies urged him forward. The arrest marked the beginning, not the end, of the process of justice. Over the coming days, Judge Sullivan conducted formal hearings, taking testimony from dozens of witnesses about Warner's activities. Additional arrests followed as Warner's most loyal men were implicated in specific acts of violence and intimidation. The land office records, when thoroughly examined, revealed extensive tampering with water rights claims, with original documents altered or replaced to favor Warner's interests. The judge ordered all falsified claims invalidated and original boundaries restored, a ruling that would allow many smaller ranchers and homesteaders to reclaim access to vital water sources. Throughout these proceedings, Lillian continued documenting everything for the newspaper, her articles providing clear explanations of complex legal matters for the townspeople. Her work earned praise not only from her uncle, but from Judge Sullivan himself, who commented that her reporting helped ensure public understanding of and support for the legal process. Ethan divided his time between Triple Creek responsibilities and supporting Lillian's efforts. His shoulder healed gradually, though the injury would leave a permanent scar, a reminder, he joked, of why it was unwise to argue with armed criminals in a church. As the hearings concluded and Warner awaited transfer to the territorial capital for trial, Willow Creek began to settle into a new normal. The absence of Warner's oppressive influence was palpable, with smaller ranchers and business owners expressing a newfound sense of freedom and possibility. One evening, about 3 weeks after the judge's arrival, Ethan invited Lillian for a ride outside town. His shoulder had healed enough for comfortable riding, and the autumn weather was perfect, warm days giving way to crisp evenings. They rode to a scenic overlook that provided a panoramic view of the valley, including both Willow Creek and, in the distance, the buildings of Triple Creek Ranch. As the sun began to set, painting the landscape in gold and amber, they dismounted to enjoy the view. "It's beautiful," Lillian said, taking in the vastness of the territory that had become her home. "So much possibility." "That's what I thought the first time I saw it," Ethan agreed, standing close beside her. "After the war, when everything I'd known was gone, I came west looking for something new. Standing on a ridge much like this one, I felt for the first time that the future might hold good things again." Lillian turned to look at him, struck by the quiet emotion in his voice. "And did it?" "Hold good things. More than I ever imagined possible," he replied, taking her hands in his. "Especially recently." The intensity in his eyes made her heart quicken. Ethan took a deep breath, then spoke with simple sincerity. "Lillian Dawson, when your horse threw you into the dust that day, I had no idea how completely my life was about to change. You've brought courage, purpose, and joy into my world. I can't imagine a future without you in it." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small ring with a modest diamond. "Will you marry me? Build a life together here in this beautiful, challenging place." Tears of happiness blurred Lillian's vision as she nodded. "Yes," she managed to say. "Yes, Ethan Calloway. I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, their future seemed to unfold before them, a life of purpose and love in a territory still finding its way toward justice and civilization. When they sealed their engagement with a kiss, the setting sun bathed them in golden light, a fitting beginning to their journey together. Epilogue. 2 years later, the offices of the Willow Creek Herald had expanded considerably since Lillian had first arrived in Montana Territory. A new printing press occupied the front room, capable of producing twice as many copies as the old one. The walls were adorned with framed editions documenting significant local events, Maxwell Warner's conviction and sentencing, the establishment of the Territorial Fair Water Rights Commission, and most recently, the groundbreaking for Willow Creek's first proper schoolhouse. Lillian Calloway sat at her desk by the window, reviewing the layout for the next day's edition. Her byline now appeared regularly alongside her uncle's, her articles on everything from territorial politics to women's suffrage drawing readers from across the region. The gold band on her left hand caught the afternoon sunlight as she made notes in the margin of a draft. The bell above the door jingled, and she looked up to see her husband entering, their 1-year-old daughter Emma cradled in his arms. Ethan's face, tanned from days working outdoors, broke into a smile that still made Lillian's heart skip a beat. "There's my 2 favorite ladies," he said, crossing to kiss Lillian before carefully transferring their sleepy daughter to her arms. "How was she?" Lillian asked, breathing in the sweet scent of her child's hair. "Perfect, as always," Ethan replied. "Mrs. Potter spoiled her terribly, of course. I think half of Triple Creek's hands stopped by the house just to make her laugh." After their marriage, Ethan had continued as foreman at Triple Creek, while Lillian worked with her uncle at the newspaper. They had built a small but comfortable home halfway between town and the ranch, allowing them both to pursue their passions while building a life together. "Uncle Miles was looking for you earlier," Lillian mentioned. "Something about the expansion plans." Ethan nodded. "Hargrove's offer is generous, selling us that parcel of land adjacent to our property at such a reasonable price." The expansion plans represented their shared vision for the future, a small ranch of their own, where Ethan could raise horses with the same principles of care and fairness that guided everything he did. It would start modestly, but like Willow Creek itself, had the potential to grow into something significant. Miles Dawson entered from the back room, his face lighting up at the sight of his great niece. "There's my little journalist," he said, gently touching Emma's cheek. The child stirred, opening eyes the same blue as her mother's to regard her great-uncle solemnly before breaking into a toothless smile. "She has your investigative spirit," Ethan observed to his wife. "Always watching, taking everything in." "And your stubborn determination," Lillian countered affectionately. "Mrs. Potter says she's never seen a child so intent on standing before she can properly sit." Miles watched their loving exchange with evident satisfaction. His newspaper continued to thrive. His niece had found happiness with a man worthy of her, and the territory was slowly evolving into a place where justice and opportunity were available to all. Not bad achievements for a man who had come west, seeking only a fresh start after his own personal losses. "I've been thinking," Miles said, "about expanding our coverage to include the northern settlements. With the railroad extension next year, there will be more communities needing a voice." "That would mean more travel," Lillian noted, though her tone suggested interest rather than objection. "For both of us," Miles agreed. "I was hoping you might consider taking the lead on some of those stories. Your articles on the territorial legislature were exceptionally well received." Ethan placed a supportive hand on Lillian's shoulder. "We could make it work. Emma and I could accompany you on the longer trips." Lillian looked between her uncle and her husband, feeling a surge of gratitude for these men who saw her as a partner and equal, who supported her professional aspirations even as she embraced motherhood and marriage. "I'd like that," she decided. "There are important stories to be told about how these new communities are developing, whether they're following Willow Creek's hard-won example of fairness or falling into the old patterns of powerful interests controlling resources." The conversation continued as they closed up the newspaper office for the day. As they stepped outside into the warm evening, Lillian paused to look down the main street of Willow Creek. The town had grown noticeably since her arrival, with new businesses opening and families arriving to stake their claim in a territory now known for its fair land practices. Her gaze returned to Ethan, who was discussing plans for the new schoolhouse with Miles. The scar on his shoulder, visible at the edge of his collar, was a permanent reminder of how much they had risked to help bring justice to this place. But it had been worth every danger, every moment of fear and uncertainty. As if sensing her thoughts, Ethan looked up and met her eyes, his expression softening into the smile he reserved only for her. He excused himself from Miles and moved to stand beside her, one arm encircling her waist as their daughter dozed against her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked simply. Lillian leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid strength of him, the certainty of his love. "Completely," she answered, "though I still maintain that being thrown from a horse was an undignified way to meet my future husband." Ethan laughed, the sound warm in the evening air. "Maybe so. But I kept my promise, didn't I?" "Which one?" Lillian asked, though she knew the answer. His lips brushed her temple gently. "I caught you, and I always will." As they walked home together through the golden light of the setting sun, Lillian reflected on how a single moment, a startled horse, a fall into the dust, a cowboy's steadying hand had changed the course of her life so profoundly. It wasn't the future she had imagined when leaving Boston, but it was infinitely richer, filled with purpose, love, and the satisfaction of helping to shape a community founded on principles of justice and equality. The Montana Territory still held challenges, still required brave individuals to stand against those who would exploit its resources and people for personal gain. But with Ethan beside her, with her uncle's mentorship, and with their daughter representing hope for the future, Lillian felt ready to face whatever came next, one story, one truth, one day at a time. And when the dust settled, as it always eventually did, what remained was what truly mattered: family, purpose, and a love that had begun with a fall but would sustain them through all of life's journeys.